Is a momentous day because we begin our final parak of this Masechah Gittin. We will finish in around 10 days, I think. So we got a little time, but today is the 9th and final parak and Daf Pei Bet 82. So interestingly, I'm going to give a little bit of a background because I like to do that. We're going to have many Mishnah, and please tell me if you don't hear me, if I'm not loud enough. We're going to have many Mishnayot and discussions that we've already had, because since it's the end of the Masechet, we've already foreshadowed many of these discussions. So some of it will be familiar to us, some will not. But interestingly, we discussed basically two major concepts. The first one, of course, is relevant, which is Gittin. And in order to have a divorce, in order for a marriage to end through a get, the Torah refers to a book called a Sefer Kritut, which literally means a book that cuts off, that takes away the connection between a husband and a wife, a man and a woman. And we've discussed before that you can make all kinds of conditions in the get. You can say, I'm divorcing you on condition that you take care of my child for 2 years, or you feed my father for 5 years, or you wear my jacket. But there was a limitation we discussed earlier, and we'll get back to, that you can't make a condition that is indefinite, a condition that goes on forever. Because then there's no kritut. I mean, you can't say a condition that for as long as you live, you never eat. Well, it's a little debatable, but let's just say as long as you live, you never eat peaches, kind of thing. Because then there's no way to know until she dies whether that's going to be conditions going to be met or not. And so it doesn't give a definitive endpoint. Now, that case is not so clear because it involves her doing something. So it might not be true. But that's true about a get. So we're starting the new parak on Daf Pei Bet. So you have to have a get that is koreit, a get that cuts off the connection and doesn't leave anything behind. The opposite may be true about kiddushin, right? The concept of kiddushin is that the word kadosh literally means, we translate as holy, but it's not really what it means in the context of kiddushin. Kiddushin means exclusive, essentially, right? A man marries a woman, and therefore she can no longer marry anybody else. She's prohibited to everyone, so she's kadosh to him, the way a karban would be kadosh to the mizbeach, right? It's dedicated for that. What if a person marries a woman and says, I'm marrying you, but you can still marry these other 10 people, right? Would such a thing be a marriage? So it sounds like it wouldn't. Our Gemara is going to discuss that there's actually a machloket about that exact issue. Interestingly. It says the Mishnah, beginning of Parak Hamigaresh, Pei Bet. Hamigaresh et ishto, husband, a man divorces his wife, Amarla, and he says to her, Harei at mutarat l'chol adam, ella leploni. Now, he doesn't write this in the get. The get says, I, Ruvain, divorce you, Sarah. But when he hands it to her, he adds a clause. And the clause he adds is, you are permitted to any person, you're no longer my wife, ella leploni, except, no, we're going to see how the word ella can mean very ambiguous, right? Because ella could mean chutz, it could mean except in the condition, or it could mean al t'nai, that you don't marry ploni. But essentially, he doesn't want his ex-wife, soon to be ex-wife, to marry a certain person, maybe someone he doesn't like, maybe someone he does like, whatever the reason, doesn't have to have a reason necessarily. But he says you can marry, you're divorced, except for ploni. So there, Rebbe Eliezer says she's matir. She is the kosher get, and she can't marry that person, which seems to go against all the rules I just told you. And the chachamim are osrim, because they say a get has to be complete. He has to relinquish all connection. If he maintains sort of our marriage still exists, so that you can't marry anyone, and it could be one person or 10 people or whatever, then it's not a get. That's the machloket Rebbe Eliezer and the chachamim. Keitzav yaseh, what should he do if he did this and it turns out, the rabbi said, you can't, it's not a good get? Yitzlenu himenu, he should take the get back from his wife, his ex-wife, v'yachzir v'yitznen, and he should go back and give it to her another time. V'omarla, he should say to her, Harei at mutarat l'chol adam, you are permitted to everybody, and stop there. Now, again, this is just really important to point out. He doesn't have to say this in general, Harei at mutarat l'chol adam, because giving a get to a woman automatically means you are permitted to everybody. Here, he needs to say it because he messed it up the first time. Right? Because the first time he said, Harei at mutarat l'chol adam, except for ploni. Let me clarify. I made a mistake. You're mutar to everyone. There's others, the Tosfot Rid, for example, here says it's not true. You don't have to say that at all. You just have to give it, and it's as if you said that. But that's the case in the Mishnah. Katvu b'tocho. Now, if he wrote inside the get, If he wrote in the get, I, Ruvain, am divorcing you, Leah, and you are now mutar to everyone except for Shimon, then that get is pasul. And even if he erases that section of the get, it would still remain pasul, and he can no longer use the get. You have to write a whole new one over. Okay, so I'm going to read the first lines in the Mishnah again, just for those who joined a little bit later, because otherwise the Gemara is going to make no sense all day. The case here is a person was megareshet ishto. He divorced his wife. Va'amarla, and he said to her, Harei at muteret l'chol adam, ella leploni. You are mutar to everyone, ella leploni. I'm going to say except for Ploni. Rebbe Eliezer said she can marry anyone except for Ploni and except for her divorced husband, if she's, well, not necessarily if he's a Kohen. And the Chachamim say she's asur to marry anyone because she's still married. It's not a get. I'll ask the Gemara, important question that's going to follow us the whole day today. Ibaylo. They asked the question, Hi, Ella, when you say to a woman, you are divorced, you can marry anyone, Ella, which again, it means except Ploni. Does that mean what I just said? Is it chutz? Ella means chutzu, meaning except I'm giving you a divorce, but it's not regards to Ploni. Oh, alminatu, or is it condition? Is it saying, I am divorcing you and you are permitted to marry everyone in the world, but I'm adding a clause to the divorce. The same way I can add a clause that you have to pay me $200. I'm adding a clause, I don't want you to marry so-and-so. Tosas has a whole discussion here, which is very fascinating, about whether this, it's really an bet, but whether if he says to him, a condition you don't marry so-and-so, the husband necessarily means don't marry or don't sleep with. And he talks about a very big distinction, that it may be the case, it's machloket actually in Tosfot, about whether there is such an important distinction, whether he has to be saying you can sleep with that person, you just can't marry them, or he's saying I don't want you to have anything to do with them at all. But either way, according to the second opinion, it's a condition. According to the first opinion, it is integral to the get. He's saying the get only works for people except for Shimon. Okay, so now says the Gemara, what is it? Why does that make a distinction? Where are we? Chutzu, second line of the Gemara. Is it except for that person? Ubechutzu depligi Rabbanan led Rebbe Eliezer. And when you exclude a person from your get, that's where the Rabbanan say and that Rebbe Eliezer is wrong, and they say it's not a get at all. The shayr le beget, because you left out some space, you left out some freedom in the get. Right, a get has to be a complete break from the husband to the wife, and here it's not complete. Right, it's conditional essentially. It's not conditional even; it's partial, because you left out one person. You said you can marry everyone except for Shimon, and therefore that's why the Chachamim disagree and say it's not a get. Aval ba'almanat modulei. If he said on condition, then they would admit that it's okay. It's a good get. You can make a get, and the same way you can make a condition that she's got to give you food for 4 years. You can make a condition that she should never marry Shimon. So, and therefore they would agree with Rebbe Eliezer. Aval ba'almanat modulei. They would admit to Rebbe Eliezer that it's a kosher get if you say almanat mida havi kol t'nai ba'alma, like any other condition that we said is kosher to put in a get. Odilma, or is it possible that they argue even almanat to depligi? Not even, but only almanat. They argue when it's a condition. Uba almanat who? Did I skip a line? Yeah. Odilma almanat who? Period. Uba almanat who depalig Rebbe Eliezer ad Rabbanan. Rebbe Eliezer says it's kosher only because it's a condition. But if you had said, I'm giving you a get that doesn't apply to so-and-so, then Eliezer would agree it's not a get. The shayr le beget, because you left some people uninvolved, meaning the get was not complete, the get was only partial. So that's the question of how to read our Mishnah. And it's a huge question, right? Because now our Mishnah, you said the word Ella, right? But if you had said chutz, or if you said almanat, what would be the halacha? So says the Gemara, Ravina, Amar Ravina, Tashma. Let me try to prove it from a Mishnah in Masechet Nigaim, which is a long time from now. Kol batim mitamim bin Nigaim. The Mishnah in Nigaim, the second parak says, 12th parak says, all houses can become tamei with tzarat. Ella shel ovdei kochavim. But for houses of non-Jews. Now, of course, what does that mean in that context? Again, it means chutz, right? A house that's owned by a non-Jew does not become tamei with nigaim. But the use of the word Ella there, if similar to the use of the word Ella in our Mishnah, right? That Ella means except for then the Mishnah makes sense. All houses are tamei except for houses of non-Jews. If it means besides the condition of non-Jews, what can the Mishnah even be saying? What condition is possible about the house of a non-Jew, right? Almanat delo mitama batei kochavim, right? If it's Eliyam and Almanatu, then what are you saying? Almanat delo mitame batei kochavim hu mitame de batei Yisrael. That it's on condition or because you cannot be mitame batei avdei kochavim, that we're mitame batei Yisrael. Ha mitame batei avdei kochavim lo mitame batei Yisrael. Would it be the case that if you didn't have a situation where you are mitame batei avdei kochavim, then you would be mitame, you would not be mitame batei Yisrael? There's no condition, right? It doesn't even apply. Now, we shouldn't try to understand what we even were thinking, but the point is that there is no condition that makes any sense in the context of that Mishnah. And od batei avdei kochavim nami mitame. Would it be true? Would it be true that the houses of the kochavim become tamei v'hatanya? The pasuk says, "V'natati nega tzarat bebeit eretz achuzatchem." A nega tzarat is only in a house that is in your land that you inherit. Eretz achuzatchem mitamei b'nigaim. Your house that you inherited is mitamei b'nigaim. Ve'ein batei ovdei kochavim mitamei b'nigaim. The houses owned by non-Jews are not mitamei b'nigaim, even if they get the same blemish on the walls. Ella, clearly, shmamina chutzu. Shmamina. You see that the word Ella in our Mishnah means chutz. So the man said to his wife, let's go back to our Mishnah now. The man said to his wife, I'm divorcing you completely, except I'm not divorcing you in regards to Shimon. Meaning you're still married to me in regards to Shimon. You can't go sleep with Shimon because you're a married woman in that regard. So you left something out in the get. And our Chachamim say, as we would have assumed, that's not a get because you didn't completely cut anything off. Shockingly, Rebbe Eliezer says it is a get. We're going to ask, what do you mean? How could it be a get? You didn't cut it off. But shockingly, Rebbe Eliezer seems to say in our Mishnah that even if you excluded a person from your get, and of course the same thing would be true about 10 people or a family of people or whatever, then in theory, you can make a get that only applies to certain people and excludes other people, according to Rebbe Eliezer. Okay? That
he
is
couldn't
how
say everybody, except for everybody.
Well, then there would
Or
be
except
no
for
one.
one person in the world.
I'm not so sure. Let's keep reading the Gemara and see. Right. So the question of what is counted as kritut and what's not, according to Rebbe Eliezer, is not clear at this point. It's not going to be so clear either. But we'll see. We'll keep going. Okay. So that's the proof from our Mishnah. Now, the Gemara points out that there's another Braita which very clearly understands the machloket Rebbe Eliezer and the Chachamim differently. And Matnitin, assuming that that's what our Mishnah means, is the Loki Haitana, does not agree with the following Tana. You don't. Okay. The Tanya, as we learned in a Braita, we are 6 lines from the bottom of Pei Bet Amud Aleph. Amar Reb Yossi Reb Yehuda. Reb Yossi Reb Yehuda Tana spoke out clearly. Lo nechleku Reb Eliezer v'Chachamim. The Chachamim and Reb Eliezer who disagree about whether this is a get or not, they don't argue al hamigaresh et ishto, in a situation where a person divorces his wife. V'amar and he says to her, Harei at muteret l'chol adam chutz mi'ploni. You can go marry anyone except I don't want you marrying my business partner. I don't want you marrying the man you cheated with, which you would be usher to anyways, right? But I don't want you marrying Shimon. She'eno migureshet. According to this Braita, which is different than what I just told you from our Mishnah, everybody agrees, including Rebbe Eliezer, that that is not a divorce. Alma nechleku, where do they argue? Al hamigaresh ishto, person who divorces his wife. Al marlan, he says to her, Harei at muteret l'chol adam. You can go, you're divorced from me. You can go marry anyone you want. Al minat shlo tinasi leploni, on condition that you don't marry a specific person. Right? So you see from this Braita, which is very clear, of course, turn the page, Shema Mina, that mutar l'chol adam mi'oto, sorry, Rebbe Eliezer, I have a very small Gemara, I'm sorry. Rebbe Eliezer, doesn't work. Rebbe Eliezer, look at that. Sorry. Rebbe Eliezer, well, much better. Rebbe Eliezer is matir l'chol adam chutz me'oto ha'ish. In that situation where you made a condition in the get, Rebbe Eliezer permits her to be divorced and therefore marry anyone she wants, except for that person who was made conditional, like any other condition in a get. And the Chachamim say she's still asur, that even in that case, it's not a get. Because although you can make a condition that she's got to pay you $50, you can't make a condition that she can't marry a specific person. You don't have that power. Okay. Says the Gemara, let's speak it out. My time with Rebbe Eliezer, Rebbe Eliezer says it's like any other condition. You can make a condition in your get, and your condition happens to be that you can't marry Shimon. The Rabbanan, the third line would say, Kol Tanai Da'alma, general conditions, lo shir le beget. There you don't make any limitation in the cutoff. You say you're completely divorced, but you've got to do something. Here, the condition is an actual condition in the nature of the get, which is supposedly cutting them off or separating them. And hacha shir la beget. Okay, now period. So that is the machloket now between the Braita, that was Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the understanding of our Mishnah based on the Mishnah in Nigaim, that in fact Rebbe Eliezer would argue even if you excluded her from the get. Says the Gemara on the fourth line from the top, Umatnitin tu kimna b'chutz. Our Mishnah, which we understood from the Mishnah in Nigaim, to be saying that a man said to his wife, I'm divorcing you except for Shimon. And Rebbe Eliezer says that's a kosher get, right? My time at Rebbe Eliezer. How could Rebbe Eliezer say that? Right? Again, the whole principle of a get is that you cut off, you separate a man and his wife, right? They're no longer connected. How could you remain connected in some way and say it's still a get? So says Rabbi Yanai, Mishum Zaken Echad. We sometimes see this quoted. We don't know exactly who that is, but Rabbi Yanai said in the name of one elder, Amarkra, there's we have two interesting pshatim, two interesting proofs here. One is from the pasuk that we're going to come to in a little bit, where it says, V'yatzam mi beito, v'halcha v'haita li'ish acher. Right? This is the Parsha Ki Teitzei. When we talk about a get, she leaves his house because she got a get, and she goes and she is with another man, another person, right? Now, ask the Gemara, that seems like a weird way to say the term, because why we say Halcha v'haita li'ish acher, Halcha v'haita la'acher, or Halcha v'haita nisua somehow, right? Why do you specify ish acher? The drasha from that pasuk is afilu lo hitira ela li'ish echad harezu megureshet. Even if she could only marry, this answers Hanan's question directly, right? Even if she could only marry one person, she's considered divorced. So if the husband says to her, I'm divorcing you, but you can only marry one single individual who lives in Antarctica, then according to Rebbe Eliezer, she would be divorced and can only marry that person. Okay, there you go. You got your answer. And Rabbanan would say that's ridiculous. Hai ish means a man. It doesn't mean a individual man. It means man, right? The whole ish, it means any individual. She can go and marry anyone she wants. So you have to be open to any situation, and Rabbi Eliezer is reading it very literally. And Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan is quoted to say, Taima Rabbi Eliezer mihacha. The reason for Rabbi Eliezer is from this drasha. It says in the pasuk, this is a pasuk Gemara that we've had many times. I remember doing it myself with this group on a Sunday morning, or maybe it's a Shabbos, like 30 dap ago. It says, Isha grusha mi isha lo yikachu. It's talking about the Kohen. Right? A Kohen is not allowed to marry a woman who's divorced, a divorcee. But the pasuk says, an Isha, a woman, right? Grusha me Isha, who's divorced from her husband, lo yikachu. He shouldn't marry. And we asked, of course, what do you mean divorced from her husband? Who else could she be divorced from? Why does it just say Isha grusha lo yikachu? And so we learned out earlier that you only need to be divorced from one person. Afilo, I'm quoting now the Gemara, I'm reading the Gemara, lo nitgarsha ela mi isha. Even if she's only divorced from her husband, then lo nifsala min hakuhuna. Then she is pasul from the kuhuna. What you mean is, even if the husband made a condition and said, I'm divorcing you, but only from me, you still can't marry other people, then she would still become, quote unquote, divorced. And therefore, alma havigita, you see that it's a get, okay? And the Rabbanan say, that's true, that pasuk does imply that, but isur kuhuna shani. She's not really divorced. But because we're talking about the Isur Kuhuna, it's either Midrabanan is one understanding, or it's even Midoraita, according to this Gemara, but it's not that they're married. It's that she already has a status of a Grusha in regards to a Kohen, but she's not really a Grusha. Because since the husband did not divorce her properly, and he didn't say to her, you're divorced to everyone, therefore, let's say he dropped dead afterwards, she really is not considered a divorcee. But for kahuna, it has we called this earlier, reach haget, right? It has the smell of a get. She looks like a divorcee, and therefore she couldn't, maybe Darabanan, maybe even Doraita, she couldn't marry a Kohen, but she's clearly not divorced, and she can't go marry somebody else. So that's how they understand. So one of these two
Could she
psukim.
still eat truma? Isn't that the issue? If she's
Um,
married to a Cohen, but right, but she's sort of still married, but she's really not married or something. But
Correct. So so midirabanan. Again, the challenge is that earlier we talked about this pasuk when we learned it 3 weeks or 5 weeks ago, I guess. We talked about it from an isur drabanan of this question of reach haget, right? Where you talk about a get, it's puzzle, etc. And there, you midirabanan, you couldn't. You'd have to treat her like a divorced person. The question really that comes up here, and Tosas again discusses this here, is that maybe here our Gemara is implying that it's a doraita, it's from a pasuk, and it's really going much further than what we talked about earlier. But yes, it would presumably puzzle her from all the status of a kahuna.
seems like Rabbi Elazar's two reasons are pretty weak here.
Okay. So I won't give it off, but the Gemara's daf, I'll tell you, it's such a beautiful statement. We're not going to get there. I guess Miriam's leading tomorrow. The tomorrow starts with saying that after Rabbi Eliezer died, all the rabbis ganged up and trashed him. Literally. And the list of people, he was dead, was Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. So Hanan, there were those who after Rabbi Eliezer died agreed with you, but
well, about this, or they trashed
about
him
this,
in general?
no, about this specifically. No, not
I see.
it wasn't personal. It was about this specific halacha. They ganged up and said, these are all the reasons he's wrong. We have a whole half a daf tomorrow ganging up on Rabbi Eliezer. So you can add if you want, if you have the guts.
But I mean, it's so weak, you don't really need to gang up on him. I mean, it's just
Well, I mean,
weak on
this
its
pasuk of,
face. I mean,
I don't know,
he's
the
just being
psukim though.
very textual.
Right, so it's
He's
very
being
textual. I wouldn't say it's a weak. I would say it's textual, right? So because these psukim are very powerful. This pasuk of Isha Grusha Mi Isha is a bizarre pasuk, right? It's a terminology that makes no sense, to be honest with you. A woman who's divorced from her husband. Who else would you be divorced from? Right?
Oh, come on.
Okay, well, that's how you do it. Okay, you're in the Rabbi Akiva camp, I'll say. But anyways, more to come tomorrow. But let's continue today. Boy, Rabbi Abba. Rabbi Abba said, before we go further questioning about whether Rabbi Eliezer has any legs to stand on, let's take this to a whole different level of, you could say, absurdity or complexity, which is, what about the fact that we generally have a parallel between divorce and marriage? And marriage is usually the opposite of divorce in this context, meaning when you marry a woman, you're basically saying you are married to me and you're not married to anybody else, right? Any other man who sleeps with this woman is an eshet ish and is prohibited. What about, can you do the same thing by marriage? Can you marry a woman and say, you're married to me and prohibited to all the men in the world, except for a few people? You know, I know you really like these people. You can sleep with them. You're not married to me in their regard, which is almost the equivalent of you're divorced from me, except you're still married to me in regards to a few people who I'm not divorced from. Can you do such a thing? Obviously, it sounds, I think, to most of us pretty preposterous, but the Gemara is going to say that according to Rabbi Eliezer, there's no reason why it's not true, right? So taking Rabbi Eliezer to the full extent, the same way you can divorce from most people except for some, you should be able to get married to most people except for some. Again, you're not marrying most people. You're married to one person, which asks you on all other people, but you can leave some people out of that marriage category and therefore still sleep with them. So or marry them even. Says the Gemara, let's ask that question, right? Rabbi Abba. Asked Rabbi Abba. I don't know how to say where we are, but it's on 12 lines from the top. First word on a line. Or if you have the Steinzal, it's the beginning of a new page. Boi Rabbi Abba. B'kiddushin heich. Right? What's the status of this concept of kiddushin? Again, you marry a woman, and generally a man who marries a woman, she's married to him and him alone. But what if he says, I'm marrying you chutz from Shimon? You're not married to me in regards to Shimon. So it says, Tiboy the Rabbi Eliezer, Tiboy l'Rabbanan. We're not sure, both according to Rabbi Eliezer, who is mekel by the get, or the Rabbanan who are machmir by the get. Tiboy the Rabbi Eliezer, who says by a get, you can leave out people. Ad kan lokam Rabbi Eliezer hacha el mishum nechtivi kroi. Rabbi Eliezer relies on these very textual readings of the psukim by get, but you have no corresponding pasuk by kiddushin. Aval hatam, right? By kiddushin, kinyin ma'alu yabe'inan. You need to have a complete kinyan. I don't know how to translate kinyan, complete, bond, let's say. And therefore you don't have that if you leave out some people. Odilma, or possibly, remember, and again, this has happened throughout our Masechet, and we'll in our next one too. V'yatza v'haita. The pasuk puts together, she leaves her husband in divorce, and she becomes married to another person, and we compare, it's a hekesh of yitziah to havaya, that leaving, get, is similar in many halachot to marriage and consummation. So maybe it's the same thing. And maybe you can marry a woman and leave out certain people from that marriage, which means she could then still go and marry them. And Tiboy the Rabbanan, we asked the same question according to the Rabbanan, because Adkan Lokami Rabbanan Hacha by Get El B'inan Kritut. Get is you need a specific category of Sefer Kritut. You have to cut off the connection between the husband and the wife. Aval Vileka. You don't have that if you leave behind certain people who they're still married to, or she's still married for that purpose. Aval Hatam, Kinyan Kodu. By Kiddushin, maybe you just need to have a connection, and maybe you can do that. Odilma, or else, V'yatzav Haita, maybe it's the same thing. Maybe the Chachamim also make a hekesh of Yitziyah to Havaya, of get to Kiddushin. So this was Rabbi Abba's question. It's a great question. I think we could stop here and think about it all day, but we're not going to. Maybe you'll think about it all day, but the Gemara is going to conclude. Lebatar di boile, after Rabbi Abba asked the question, Hadar Pashta, he said, I thought about this all night. I think it's not a question. Because Bein the Rebbe Eliezer, Bein the Rabbanan, Binan V'yatza v'haita. It should be the same thing. Whatever you say by get, you should say by kiddushin. There's no difference. These are copies, they're mirrors of each other. The Torah compares them. And so if I hold Rebbe Eliezer by get, that you can divorce a woman, but say you're still married to me in regards to Reuven or Shimon, I can marry a woman and say, but you're still not married to me in regards to Shimon, meaning you can go marry Shimon. And according to the Chachamim, you can't say that by get, you can't say it by kiddushin. Okay? Amar Abaya. Now says Abaya, well, let's.
Well, he would allow plural marriages for women.
Correct, 100%, according to Rebbe Eliezer.
That's it.
Okay. Now,
I guess that's consistent.
It's consistent. Now, you'd have to be very clear about the conditions, right? You have to say it, obviously. So just like by get, you'd have to specify who it is. You'd say by kiddushin, you'd have to say you're married to me. Chutz me, and you can make a list, or chutz me everyone but someone. Now we're going to go back. We're going to go all the way back to Yevamot because we want to travel throughout the whole Seder Nashim today. But if you recall, in Yevamot, we had a whole discussion. Nava remembers this. A whole discussion about Eshet Shtei Yamim, right? That it says you only can do yibum to a woman who comes from one brother, but not if they came from two brothers. And we had a whole discussion about how can a woman fall to yibum from two husbands, since a woman cannot be married to two men at one time. Find a way to two men at one time. We had a whole discussion about Eshet Shnei Yamim. And if you recall, I'll just remind you, since it's been a long time, that we talked about this question of Ma'amar, right, where Reuven died and his widow, his childless wife, or he was childless. His wife falls to his brothers Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda, let's say. Shimon goes ahead and does Ma'amar. Remember, Ma'amar was Kiddushin D'Rabbanan to the Yevama. Then Shimon, let's say Shimon dies. So then the question was, can Levi or Yehuda come and do Yibam or Chalitza? And we said before that Midrabanan, they can't do Yibam because she is the Yevama was the Yevama of Reuven, but she was also married Midrabanan to Shimon. And so she's married to Reuven and Shimon, or coming from Reuven and Shimon, and therefore Levi can't do Yibam. Levi can only do Chalitza, right? Because you can't, you say Eshet Yevama Achat, but not Eshet Shnei Yavmin. Now, the question now is going to be, of course, in this regard, now that we all of a sudden have this concept of a woman marrying two men, this is a brand new concept, and this is going to come and discuss that issue. So says Abaya now, 12 lines or 15 lines from the bottom. In Tim Salom or Ita le Rabbi Abba. Let's say Rabbi Abba is right, and that you have to be consistent. That if Rabbi Eliezer says that a woman can be divorced partially, she can also be married partially, right? So let's say, Reuven walks up to a woman, the Kidshan, he says, I would like to marry you. And you can therefore not sleep with anybody else, except I'm not marrying you in regards to my brother, Shimon. Shimon's his brother. Chutz mi Shimon. I don't know why he would say this, but obviously it's not a question we don't understand motivation in the Gemara. It's clearly a technical case. And then Shimon, of course, comes to her and he says, Kidsha, I want to marry you too. And you are usher to the whole world, except for my brother Reuven. Okay. So now she's in theory married to Reuven and she's married to Shimon. Umetu shnehem. And then Reuven and Shimon die, because maybe they shouldn't have done this. Mityabmot leLevi. And she can do Yibam to Levi. How could she do Yibam to Levi? Right? She's married to both of his brothers. Says Abaya, sounds like a lot of fun. I don't say that she is the wife of two dead brothers. My taima. The reason is that Kiddushay de Reuven ahanu. According to Rabbi Eliezer, the first Kiddushin of Reuven was a good Kiddushin, right? He was able to say to her, I will marry you. You are not my wife in regards to my brother Shimon. And Shimon can sleep with her, shockingly. But, however, Kiddushay de Shimon lo ahani. But when Shimon then comes and marries her, he's not married to her. Why? Because nothing changed, right? She's a married woman in regards to the whole world, except for two people, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven she's married to. Shimon was left out of the Kiddushin. Every other man in the world is prohibited to sleep with this woman. Shimon then comes along to her and says, I'm now marrying you. So what happened? What changed? Except for my brother Reuven, let's say, right? So now she can sleep with Shimon, she can sleep with Reuven, she can't sleep with anyone else in the world. But that's not different than what she was before, right? So there's not really a marriage. So Kiddushay de Reuven ahanu, but Kiddushay de Shimon lo ahanu. There was no Kiddushin to Shimon, and therefore when Shimon and Reuven die, she falls to Levi as a widow only of Reuven, not a widow of Shimon. Ella, continues the Gemara, where would you find the case where she was actually married to two people? Kigon, let's say Reuven married her, Sheba Reuven, 8 lines on the bottom, the Kidja chutz mi Shimon. Reuven came and said, I'm marrying you, and you're my wife regards to every person in the world except my brother Shimon. So she's permitted to Shimon. Uba Shimon, the Kidja, stop. Shimon comes and marries her without giving room for his brother Reuven. He's not a nice brother, right? Or maybe he is a nice brother. I don't know. He's not. He didn't do what his brother did. So now the second marriage actually took effect, because when she married Shimon, she became prohibited to Reuven, right? Because she's no longer permitted to anyone else in the world. And then they both died, right? But Shimon v'kidshastam, the kiddush Reuven ahanu the misra alma. Reuven's marriage made her married to Reuven, so she can't sleep with any other man in the world except for Reuven and Shimon. And kiddushay de Shimon ahani the misra a Reuven, and therefore it was a real kiddushin. Then they both died. Then she would not be allowed to do yibam to Levi, because she in fact came to Levi from two marriages. So one interesting case. Says Abaya 5 lines in the bottom. What about another case? Okay, let's say Abaya, Amarla, a man says to a woman, Harei at muteret l'chol adam, I'm divorcing you, and you are now permitted to marry everybody in the world, chutz mi Reuven v'Shimon, except for two people, Reuven and Shimon. Okay, so now in regards to Reuven and Shimon, basically, she's still married to the first guy. Let's call the first guy, what are we going to call him? Levi. Okay, so she's still married to Levi, meaning she's a married woman as regards Reuven and Shimon. According to Rebbe Eliezer in our Mishnah, she can go out and marry anyone she wants in the world, except for a Kohen, and except for Reuven and Shimon. Okay, so that's what you said. But then you go back, Chazar v'amarla the Reuven v'Shimon. But then you go back to and you say, you know what? And now I divorce you in regards to Reuven and Shimon. So can you make a second divorce kind of question? Can you change the clause? Mahu. Miyamrinan maida asar shara. You say, well, what he had prohibited previously, Reuven and Shimon, he now permitted. So that's good. Odilma my dishar the asar shara or my dishara asar. Or do you say the opposite? That what he meant to say to her was, I changed my mind. What I meant to say, and again, this is just a real question in his intent. I meant to say I messed the whole thing up. I said to you, you can go marry anyone in the world except Reuven and Shimon. What I really wanted to say to you was, you can only marry Reuven and Shimon. You can't marry anybody except Reuven and Shimon, in which case you can't undo a get, right? You can't go back 3 years later and say, I undo my get, and therefore his words would have no effect, okay? Im Tim Salom are the bottom words, top of Pei Gimel now, my da'asr shara, that in fact he was allowed to remove the prohibition on Reuven and Shimon. So meaning get number one was you can marry anyone in the world except for Reuven and Shimon, but get number two added that you can marry also Reuven and Shimon. What if he said, fourth word, the Reuven, Mahu? If he just says the Reuven in the second get, do you assume he means the Reuven, V'huadin the Shimon? He means the same, the people I left out before, I'm now including. The Reuven, Mishum de Patach Bey. He said Reuven because he's number one. Or Dilma, the Reuven Dafka. Or maybe means, no, I changed my mind. I think Reuven's a good guy. You can marry Reuven. This guy has a lot too much power over his ex-wife, right? Or Dilma, the Reuven Dafka, but he didn't mean Shimon. V'im Tim Salomar, the Reuven Dafka. If you say that Reuven means only Reuven in the second get, what if he said in the second get, the Shimon? You can go and you can marry Shimon. Mahu. Did he mean here, Shimon who had in the Reuven? He means both. And the reason he said Shimon, Shimon, Mishum de Salach Minei, he was the second one, right? You mentioned Reuven and Shimon, and I said, no, you can even marry Shimon. Or Dimon Shimon Dafka. Yeah, not so clear. These are very technical questions in a very technical halacha. And boy, Rav Ashi, the final question today, what if he says Af the Shimon Mahu? He says, oh, you can also marry Shimon. Or Af the Reuven, right? Do you say Af is a Reuven koi, meaning you can also marry Shimon, meaning also Reuven and Shimon? Odilma Af Alma koi, he's referring to the first get where he said you can marry everybody. Now he's adding Shimon. Teko, we don't really know how to understand his thought in all these processes. Again, it's a very technical halacha there, but where we end today, and we're going to pick up from this tomorrow, is that according to our understanding of our Mishnah, Rebbe Eliezer fundamentally says that you can have a get and leave out people from your get. So you can divorce a woman so that she's now allowed to marry anyone that she wants, right? But you can exclude people from the get, including in the etzim of the get. You can exclude certain individuals, anyone you want, essentially. And according to Rebbe Abba, the same is true about kiddushin. That according to Rebbe Eliezer, you can marry a woman, which therefore makes her prohibited to the rest of the world, but you can exclude certain people from that marriage and say that my marriage will not have effect in regards to certain people, which in theory would permit a woman to get married to multiple people if they made these conditions properly. Now, tomorrow we're going to see that, as I said earlier, they ganged up and they felt that Rebbe Eliezer's opinion was quite inappropriate and wrong, and we'll see why as we learn tomorrow.
Right. So everything we just learned for the last 15 minutes is according to Rabbi Eliezer, right?
Correct.
Going with the implications of his, shita, whatever.
His partial get, right? Partial get and partial kiddushin, basically.
Yeah, right.
According to the Chachamim, there's no concept. You can't leave out people.
It's not right.
Right.
Okay.
But just to be clear, according to this opinion, the Chachamim say you can make it t'nai. You can divorce a woman on condition that she never goes and marries a certain person. If you don't like that, you can say that. You're allowed to make conditions. As I said earlier, and I didn't go too deep into this, Tosfos discusses whether you can make a condition that's complete, meaning you could say you could never sleep with that person, or whether your condition is limited to you can't marry that person, but I can't stop you from sleeping with them.
Right, because isn't the whole idea is that you're muteret l'kol adam? Doesn't it? That's what it says, right? So if you made a conditional that you can only marry 3 people in the world, right? Then that would be pasul according to the Chachamim, right?
It was a debate. We weren't sure, right? There was one opinion the Chachamim would say anyone you leave out in a get. You can make many conditions in a get, but you can't make a condition the people who she can marry. That's a off-the-table condition. But that was one opinion. The other way we learned it, which was the way of our Mishnah, is that that's not true. Chachamim only had a problem as if in the words of the get, you said, you're divorced to everyone except for 5 people. But if I said to her, you're divorced to everyone, but I'm making a condition on the tonight that if you ever drive a Ford, you're not divorced. Or if you ever marry Shimon, you're not divorced, then that counts as well. Anyways, don't take any of this practically, right?
Of course.
Keep putting the Gemara until we get to
I had a question from the second to last case.
Yes.
It seems like he was saying the second marriage is a full marriage because her status somehow changed, like she was excluded from more people.
Well, so it's not a question whether it's a full marriage, it's a question of whether anything actually happened. Was she married to Shimon or not? Right? In his first case, he said, first marriage, he said to her, "You're married to everyone in the world except for you're
Reuven.
married to." No, she married Reuven, right? And said Reuven married her and said, "You're usher to the whole world except my brother Shimon." So she is married to Reuven. Shimon then came and gave her kiddushin and said, "You're married to me, right? And you are therefore usher to the whole world, except I'm leaving my brother Reuven out of this marriage." So the question then is she really married to Shimon or not?
No, the case after that, where they said that she would fall to Yibum
Right.
to Levi because the second marriage excluded the first husband.
Correct. Reuven became usher to her, so therefore she's married to Shimon. In regards, what does that mean? She's married to Shimon, that she can no longer sleep with Reuven because she's now off limits to him.
So could that work with if the first husband excluded two people and the second husband only excluded one of them? That would also be a full
correct.
Kiddushin?
Yeah, as long as, according to that thing, correct. As long as the Kiddushin had an impact, so that something changed because of this Kiddushin, then yes, then it would count her as his wife, even though very partial wife.
Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, have a good day. Very exciting daf, and Miriam will pick it up tomorrow with the four sages.
Thank you.
Shavuot tov.
Shavuot tov.